We're back again with Liz Craig, who's all seated, and we did a wonderful switch there while you weren't looking. Liz, you're new to politics. This is your first time running. Yep. Can you give us a bit of tell us a bit of where you come from and why you're running?
Yeah, well, I'm a public health doctor, and I've spent the last 10 years monitoring the health of our children across the country, and what we've been seeing over those 10 years is quite concerning. So in our reports we're seeing really high rates of hospital admissions for poverty-related conditions, you know, skin infections, pneumonia, those kinds of things. And I think what really upsets me the most is we're losing about 60 babies before their first birthday with preventable conditions, you know, some cot deaths, some respiratory infections. And the other thing we're seeing is that lots of families are living in really difficult circumstances, so having to make the decision, do I turn off the heater or do I pay the food bill? And what we're seeing is that that's really impacting on family life. And for me, probably when the global financial crisis hit back in 2009, some of us started to get quite concerned about that, because if we were seeing this kind of thing happening when the grass was green, what was going to happen as unemployment rose? And lots of families, you know, if they ended up on a benefit system, which we knew wasn't going to protect them from hardship, we were really concerned we might see a deterioration. So we set up a website to monitor the impact of the downturn on child wellbeing. And I think what we've seen every year since we've been, you know, updating that data is exactly the same. Have you seen the movie Groundhog Day?
I beg your pardon?
Have you seen the movie Groundhog Day?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. So
I've lived it. So I moved to Dunedin.
Yeah, so I think it's my husband's favourite movie, but the same guy has to live the same day over and over and over again till he learns from his mistakes. And I think for us updating, you know, our data every year, what we do is we say, put a media release out and it says, you know, high rates of child poverty, lots of kids admitted to hospital for really preventable conditions. And what happens every year is I think people are concerned about that, so the media runs a story and we got a lot of feedback saying we need to do something about it. And then what happens every year is the media has a big, the politicians have a big debate in Parliament and say, yes, we need to fix it. And then every year nothing happens, and we go back to our little offices and we start to update the data again. And I think for me, stepping up in politics is about escaping Groundhog Day, because I don't want to spend the next 10 years, you know, putting out the same data and seeing it again. And so I guess why I've chosen Labour is I think it's a party that wants to do something about it, and it's big enough and it's got the capacity to do something about it. So for me, that's why I'm stepping up.
So let's go back a bit. You said you worked nationally in this role. So is that in many centres, or just working on national?
Oh, right. So our research unit does all the child health monitoring for every DHB in the country.
Based in
Dunedin here at the University of Otago.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And these diseases of poverty, did they exist 20, 30 years ago? Were they being measured then, or is this something new? Yeah,
we've got data that sort of goes right back for a couple of decades. Yeah. But I think what you think as a developed economy is you would expect that things would get better. Yes. And what we're seeing is that things haven't got better. So the other thing is you've got these conditions where you shouldn't be seeing them in a developed country, things like rheumatic fever. So while the rates are low, we're getting kids coming in with permanent heart scarring from rheumatic fever. And that's not something that, you know, we get doctors from overseas that come expecting New Zealand to be a developed country. They're not expecting to see rheumatic fever. They're not expecting to see bronchiectasis, which gives you permanent, you know, lung scarring.
And is this an embarrassment? I mean, for New Zealand internationally?
We shouldn't be seeing it.
Do they have similar problems in the States or the UK or Australia?
Some pockets of poverty exist in other countries as well, but the scale that we've got here, what a lot of it comes back to is the changes we made in the early 90s, where we had the mother of all budgets and we cut benefits. We really looked at the Employment Contract Act, which impacted significantly on low-income workers' ability to negotiate a living wage, you know, market rates for state houses. And we've pulled back from some of those, but not all of those changes. And what happened then is child poverty rates just surged, and we've never fixed it since. Yeah. So is this something where parents are not able to afford to go to a doctor? Is that the issue? Or, I mean, obviously the causes are unhealthy homes, but are they not actually following up on it? Are they leaving it too late
take their kids?
Well, the stories we're hearing is some people having difficulty getting to the GP, but more often it's the after-hours GPs. And so what's happening is families are often waiting to see if kids get a bit sicker, and then they're ending up in A&E. And often in A&E they ended up with one of the more junior doctors who, instead of being experienced and knowing kind of what a viral infection is or not, they'll revert to their training and order several blood tests and a chest x-ray and a urine test before they make a diagnosis. So I think it's costing the country quite a lot.
I'm treating this interview like we've got 45 minutes to talk about things, but we haven't. So let's tell me a little bit about the electorate that you're standing in.
Sure.
You live there?
I work in Dunedin, but we've got a small farmlet just outside Balclutha in Rimahapa. Yeah.
And what precipitated you choosing to stand for that electorate?
Well, I think our connection with the local area, with our farmlet, and I think it's also, I always say it's the most beautiful electorate in the country. I mean, we've got Queenstown all the way near Milford Sound, Tiana, we've got all of the Catlins, up Balclutha, Lake Waihola, so it's absolutely stunning. But it's got a lot of issues that, we really need to be thinking about, regional development, job growth. We've got a DHB that's really cash-strapped, and yet we've got a whole lot of increasing population and health need up in the Queenstown Lakes area. Okay,
so let's go through the electorate bit by bit. Yeah. I think enough of us are conversant with it on the map to be able to work it out. We had Todd Barclay here a few weeks ago, and he said that it was a pretty homogenous sort of a electorate, that people were much the same. Would you agree with that?
No, I would actually disagree with that. It's very, very diverse. So I've spent a bit of time up in Queenstown, and what we've got there is a really growing population, and we've got a lot of affordable housing need. So we've got a lot of families really struggling to get that first step in the housing ladder. And so it's about housing. It's also about a population that's growing, people wanting to retire there, but we've got no dementia care, those kinds of things. So the health services, we need to be thinking about what we do there.
So at the moment they've got to go to Invercargill or Dunedin, or to the little hospital that you've got in Clyde.
The hospital can cope with some conditions, and it can cope with, and then it can stabilise people and send them out if you get a very severe trauma. But I think, increasingly people want to work there and then retire there, and then progressing on. There's not many vacancies in the local, rest home service, and so it's about those health services for a growing population, on top of having huge numbers of visitor population, and then you get a lot of injuries and alcohol-related issues. So that's quite different to the other side of the electorate, where we've got a lot of pressures on water quality, and we need to look at how our farmers can sustainably farm. And there's a lot of good farmers there that are doing some really innovative things, but we've got to balance that with making sure water quality's doing well.
And you've got unemployment rising.
Well, the other part of the electorate, where near we are in Balclutha, we've just lost 4 timber mills, and there's other businesses that people are worried about that may end up closing. And so there it's about creating jobs, and I think particularly it's the manufacturing jobs we're losing. So it's that value add. We talk about 50% of our logs going offshore unprocessed, and so again thinking through. But from a labour perspective, we've got a lot of really innovative policies in each of those areas where I think we could really do some really, in terms of affordable housing up in Queenstown, in terms of our timber policy and manufacturing across the east side of the electorate, in terms of our water policies across all the dairying areas.
Does Gore Southland have a common identity, or is it just some strange geographical electoral thing? I mean, do people in Gore have any empathy for what's going on in Queenstown and vice versa? Or?
Well, I think we're all Southerners, but I think our needs, thinking for me as an MP trying to advocate for different communities, I don't think that there's a general issue I would advocate across the whole region. I would look at what each community's needs are and then work with those issues.
Right. Now, the Southland Times once said, I think beautifully, that the people of Gore Southland would vote for a gumboot if it was a blue gumboot. Well, I think what's going to happen there? Are you going to turn people around on that one?
Well, I think people now have got a real choice, and I think they need to feel like they've got a choice. They don't just have to vote National because that's what they've always done. Because I think in what we've been talking about in our public meetings is we've got some really good policy, and as I've spoken through about 20 different public meetings, personally I believe that Labor's got the best lot of policies that would address all those diverse needs across our region. So there is a real choice coming up. this week, next week, up to the 20th of September. And I think it's been about explaining that to people as I've gone round.
And I understand that there are only 1,200 people who live in the electorate who earn over $100,000 a year.
Well, again, I think the thing is, for me, having done stats all my life, it's slightly different. You've actually got to understand each community's needs. And so for me, I don't tend to work from the stats. I tend to work from talking to people and listening to the stories, because I think you get a much better feel that way, right, than trying to, work through from numbers. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so what will be the best outcome for you on election day?
Well, I think we need a Labour-led government. That would be the best outcome, because in terms of what we need for job creation, I can't see any other parties doing anything in that space. I think our housing affordability, what we're going to do in that space, is much more transformational than what I've seen on offer anywhere else. And I think our water policies are what we need locally as well. So the best outcome, I think, for Cleatha Southland and probably for the country is a Labour-led government.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry it was so short.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
My best.
Well, this is the penultimate vote chat for the series. On Tuesday, we're going to be joined by Nick Smith, who's the Conservation Minister, and he will be joining us from 5:30, and Nicole will be taking that interview. So please tune in for that. Once again, I'd like to thank our researchers who got so involved with the questions for today. I'd also like to thank our crew, who seldom get acknowledged and are rather wonderful. And I hope you'll join us again at 5:30 on Tuesday to see Nick Smith talk.